I'll skip very quickly through the pictures, but just to remind us what it's like for the crew on the bridge of the ship. All of this is going on, and you've got the aftermath of the collision. As Victor and Richard have already been through, there's a lot going on, certainly evidence to be taken, considerations of what actually happened. But people very often forget or leave the issues of jurisdiction and limitation of liability to a little later. It is absolutely critical in collision cases that you are dealing with this as soon as possible. Victor has made reference to the amount of information that's available on YouTube and elsewhere these days. We've seen a recent clip on YouTube last couple of weeks, a collision in the Suez Canal. There was also some AIS data posted within a couple of hours of the incident. So you need to be thinking very, very quickly about the jurisdiction and limitation of liability, because if you delay, it could literally cost millions of dollars. I will hurry through this because the intership claim is a tortious claim. Richard made reference to that. So the sorts of places where might you bring the action if it happens at sea? Territorial waters is a logical place. Then we've got the domicile of the registered owners or the variable charter and the flag registry. So those are some options. But you can agree jurisdiction, of course, if there is an appropriate forum. I think the ASG wordings were put up previously, so very happy to see that they're being used internationally, not just in the UK. Alternatively, you can try and found jurisdiction by way of an arrest, which of course is much more expensive, time-consuming, and you have to be much quicker off the mark, depending on where you want to commence your action. Security and jurisdiction always go hand in hand, we say, so you don't want to agree jurisdiction without having security and vice versa. So the considerations: where do you want to bring your action? Well, you need to look very carefully at several factors, and you need to be doing it very quickly. Having an understanding of the limitation regime in the possible jurisdictions that you've got to play with. Look at the procedural rules. We'll have a look at some of those because some of them have very, very quirky procedural rules, some of these jurisdictions, which could mean that your claim is not going to be dealt with as well as it might. Also, the investigative powers of the various port states, that might be a factor. You might want to get evidence from the other ship, so we'll have a look at that. Local law issues, again, and time limits. But I'll rattle through those, and apologies if I'm speaking too quickly. You can shout at me if I am. So, limitation of liability. We'll just concentrate for today's purposes on the limitation regimes. We've got the value-based jurisdictions, places like Argentina and USA. Then we look back at the 1957 Convention. It's much easier to break the limits of liability if you're dealing with the 1957 Convention than the later conventions, the 76 Convention and the 96 Protocol. We can have a quick look at how that translates in terms of money. Sorry, it should show the columns 57, 76 and 96 are all dollars based on an exchange rate. So the roughly 1.5 SDRs to the dollar. So you can see that there's a dramatic difference between the 57 and the 96 protocol limits. So it is extremely important, if you think you're going to be the paying party, to limit your liability. Under the 76 Convention, 96 Protocol, it's very difficult to break limit. And I've written there, except if it's proved that the loss resulted from the personal act or omission committed with intent to cause such loss, or recklessly with the knowledge that such loss would probably result. We've had a couple of cases in the UK The Marion was a vessel which dragged anchor over a pipeline, and the managers of the ship had failed to ensure that the right charts were on board, and that would have avoided the incident. That they were allowed to break limits. And the Saint-Jacques 2 was a preliminary issue, but the fishing boat was effectively travelling the wrong way up the traffic separation scheme, and the court decided that it had to go to a full trial because on the merits it looked as though that the opponents were able to break limits of liability. We've got the new limits coming in under the 96th protocol. They're due to come in next June, and there's roughly a 51% increase to the limit, so there's a huge increase. It's going to be automatic for the signatories to the 96th protocol. My understanding is that Italy is not a signatory, but you apply similar limits, so that's going to be another quirk to deal with. The drafting, I would say, is not good, so as a matter of English law, we're advising people if there are collision claims to commence them before the 8th of June, otherwise you might arguably be stuck with the higher limits. I'm not going to read these out in detail, they're available on the IMO website, but there are much higher limits, and I think you can see there, the blue are the existing limits, and the red is the proposed new limits. So there's a very dramatic increase again when you're looking at 1996 protocol limit countries. I'm not going to deal too much with the English in rem proceedings. Suffice to say that there are a number of quirks, and it just serves to show that you should look at the procedural rules of the country you're planning to commence proceedings in, because sometimes you might get stuck. So for example, our in rem claim form must be served within 12 months of the issue. You can apply for an extension. But if the vessel you're seeking to serve comes into UK waters and sails, you might not be able to get an extension to the validity of your writ, and so your claim will expire. So you need to be aware of these sort of things. Take again the collisions and elisions. We've got a 2-year time limit for collisions, but 6 years for an elision with a fixed and floating object. But what happens if you hit another vessel alongside? Well, chances are it's going to be a collision. Better not to take the risk and commence your proceedings within the 2 years. Again, compare that with other countries to see what their local procedural rules are and their issues on time limits. Investigative powers is quite key. I think Victor spoke about the types of information that you want to gather very quickly after the collision. This is the tricolor which collided in the channel and sank, car carrier as you can see. We managed to get the evidence from our crew, the crew of the tricolor, take statements from them, and then the colliding vessel came into a Belgian port, I believe, and we were able to appoint a Belgian court surveyor. So having had the benefit of taking evidence from our crew, understanding what our case was, we were able to sit in on the court survey and drive the questioning so that there was completely in an excellent position when it came to looking at liability. So when you're casting around for your preferred forum, you need to be exceptionally careful because of the local laws, the local implementation of the laws. For example, Malaysia has recently acceded to the 1996 protocol to the 76 Convention. However, the eastern Malaysian states, Sarawak and Sabah, still apply the 1957 Convention limits. So you have a huge difference between what one country is applying, even within its own borders, depending on which port your ship happens to be sailing into. So you need to be exceptionally careful. They might change that, but for the time being, it's a big problem. could be very useful, of course. So how, as a ship, as an owner, do you drive the forum, particularly if you're waiting for your opponents to do something, they're not quite in a position, you don't want to go against them in their domicile, their ship isn't in the right port. Well, there are several tricks that we've used in the past to found jurisdiction. For example, the master suing the ship owner for claims for the loss of his hat or his computer or his Rolex, whatever it might be. But again, that gives rise to a right to limit liability and then to bring all other claims into that forum. So that's one. We've also used claims as between bareboat charterers and the registered owners for engine spares and lashing equipment. So again, you can use that to effectively create a claim within which you can then draw all of the other claims into that particular jurisdiction. There's a case called the Western Regent in the UK, and that's quite useful. It says that you can, as a protective measure, institute proceedings in your own domicile without having a claimant, a third-party claimant. So we can in the UK do that. I'm going to talk about the Baltic-Ace, more recent collision in the Channel. Baltic-Ace sank after colliding with the Corvus J, and we were in a race to found jurisdiction. Actually, we, as a matter of precaution, we got the master to also, he commenced a proceedings, I should say, in the Isle of Man, which is a registered domicile. Interestingly, in the Isle of Man, which is part of the United Kingdom, but signatory to the '96 Convention, however, it excludes Article 21D claims where you can not limit for wreck removal in the UK, but you can limit for wreck removal in the Isle of Man. So there was a potential claim by the Dutch government of 67.5 million euros to remove the wreck, but actually we were able to limit in one fund to $14.7 million. So that's an enormous saving, and we were minutes ahead of our opponents in getting the claim issued. So it's exceedingly important to act very quickly. Rushing on, I mean, there are a number of other traps. I can't go through them all for every jurisdiction, but you need to be very careful about the time bars in certain places. So Panama is one example. They've recently changed it from quite a well-used 2-year time bar for collisions to 1 year if the collision took place in international waters, or it's the law of the place of the collision. So again, you've got to be very careful when you're trying to found jurisdiction that you don't get stuck somewhere where you're either out of time. Greece is another one, which is quite quirky. It's 2 years if both parties, both ships are signatories to the 1910 Convention, but it's the end of the year after the collision, so the 31st of December the following year, if one of those ships is not a signatory to the 1910 Convention. I'm looking at my colleague Dimitri. No, he's telling me that's wrong. Oh, he doesn't know. Oh, that's all right. Phew. Just checking. We've been waiting for him to say I'm absolutely wrong, but that's it. And I think here in Italy it depends on the flag of the vessel, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. So again, local laws. The other quirk is the lien. Of course, if you exercise your lien and you want to arrest the ship to found jurisdiction, you've got to be wary of how they apply the lien convention. So, for example, in India, they have a very generous 3-year time bar for commencing your action, but the lien will expire after 1 year. So if you need to arrest a ship to found your jurisdiction, then you might well be out of time. So there's a lot of stuff that you really need to think about, and all of this has to be done very, very quickly within the first few hours of a collision. because if the information is out there, you really might be up against a race against your opponents. I think, how's that for a race? On time. There we go. Thank you very much.